Welcome to TEDxFSCJWomen Fearless. I'm Dr. Lourdes Norman McKay. I'm a professor at Florida State College at Jacksonville and the executive director of TEDxFSCJ. Let's hear now from Chris Anderson of TED.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Now that we've heard from these inspirational women, let's take our event to the live component. It's my pleasure to introduce our event hostess and panel moderator, Lorena Inclán. Lorena anchors Action News Jax this morning on the weekends and reports during the week. She joined the Action News Jax team in 2012. Before moving to Jacksonville, she was a multimedia journalist for Univision Orlando. Lorena began her broadcast journalism career in the Texas Panhandle. While there, she was the only bilingual anchor, reporter, and producer for KFDA News Channel 10 and its sister station, Telemundo Amarillo. She got her start in the TV industry by working behind the scenes as a camera operator and studio technician at WTVJ NBC6 in South Florida. Lorena is the daughter of Cuban immigrants. She was born and raised in Miami, where she attended the University of Miami and holds a Bachelor of Science in Communication. Lorena, thank you for being here with us today. We look forward to you moderating our panel conversation.
Thank you so much, Lourdes, for that introduction. It is an honor for me to be in this room, even though it's virtual, with so many awesome women. And what a way to kick off this event with those inspirational videos from all around the world. I want to begin with introducing our awesome panel. You already see them here on the screen. We'll begin first with Mrs. Shawana Brooks. So let me tell you a little bit about Shawana. She is a literary artist and avid public speaker for her various roles as a curator focused on the relationship between artists and their communities. Her art revolves around personal storytelling fused to issues of social justice, from medical and maternal concern to civic engagement. She is the founder of a public arts agency who works to amplify Black artists through representation and storytelling. Brooks' work to break the barriers, and her work has been highlighted in the national media, including NPR Morning Edition. She was selected as the first official curator for the Jacksonville Public Library in the city of Jacksonville. Recognized by her peers, she received the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville Robert Arley White Award for Artist Advocacy, the first Black person to win the award in 2018, and then 2 years later, she made history again, winning the council's highest honor, the Helen Lane Founder Award. Welcome, Shawana, to the discussion. Next, we have Dr. Diana Green. Dr. Green began her tenure as superintendent of Duval County Public Schools, which is the 20th largest school district in the nation. She arrived to this role with extensive classroom and leadership experience, beginning with her first elementary teaching position at Mammy Agnes Jones in Baldwin, Florida. Prior to becoming a superintendent in Duval County, Dr. Green served as a superintendent and deputy superintendent of instructional services in Manatee County. During her 33-year career as an educator, she has spent time as a teacher, assistant principal, and principal, as well as in curriculum development, staff development, and in senior executive leadership. And on a personal note, Dr. Green's father served in the Air Force, and she grew up by living in locations all around the United States and also abroad. She is married to James Green, an independent financial advisor and retired Navy. They have 2 sons, Alden and Joshua. Welcome, Dr. Green. Next, we have Dr. C. Nicole Mason. As the nation's foremost intersectional researchers and scholars, Dr. Nicole Mason brings a fresh perspective and a wealth of experience from the Institute for Women's Policy Research. For the past 2 decades, Dr. Mason has spearheaded research on issues relating to economic security, poverty, women's issues, and entitlement reforms, policy formation, and political participation among women, communities of color, and youth and racial equity. Prior to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, Dr. Mason was the executive director of the Women of Color Policy Network at New York University, Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service, the nation's only research and policy center focused on women of color at a nationally ranked school of public administration. She is also an inaugural Ascend Fellow at the Aspen Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Dr. Mason. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Claire Thomas is with us. Dr. Thomas is a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. Department of State, and she is currently Desk Officer in the Africa Bureau, Office of Southern African Affairs, covering Botswana and Namibia. Previously, Dr. Thomas served as Vice Consul in Chennai, India, and as Environment, Science, Technology, and Health Officer in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Before becoming a diplomat, Dr. Thomas was a product manager in the software and analytics sector in Silicon Valley. She holds a PhD in linguistics and a BA in Russian and linguistics from the University of Lund in Sweden. Originally from the suburbs of Boston, Dr. Thomas went to high school in Brooklyn, New York, and is married with 2 grown daughters and a teenage son. Welcome, Dr. Thomas. So there you have all the credentials of our awesome women on this panel. We're going to hear from their experiences in the professional world, also in their personal life as well. And I'm going to kick off this conversation with the theme of the day, fearlessness, which we just heard in the example of Belarus. Sometimes fearlessness is born from when you have no choice but to act because you know that something is wrong and you need to do something about it. So every person has fears, and it's overcoming those fears that allows us to succeed. What fears do you believe hold women back? And Shawana, let's kick off this party with you. Just remember to unmute there, Shawana, if you can. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me, and I'm so excited to answer this question. So, what fears hold women back? I think sometimes it's just the fear of getting out of the idea stage, that there's a concept or something that you want to move on, and you don't have the notion maybe of like where you first start, or maybe you even do, but it's just that that fear to just act, as the beautiful speaker said before, and sometimes having no choice is what puts you in that position. But so often I hear from other people who think you live in this really like fearless kind of atmosphere, that oh you're so brave, you're so courageous with the things that you do, and often it is just that you're just acting on an idea that you feel really passionate about.
And there you go. The unmute button, it gets us every time, the Zoom world. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Definitely. Dr. Mason, would you like to weigh in?
So I really enjoyed the speakers and this idea of fearlessness as a commitment. So it's something that you do over and over again and commit to being fearless and moving without fear. One of the things in my own work, in my own career, is this idea of what will happen when I step out and I'm bold in my leadership. Will it be rejected? Will it be accepted? And as a woman of color leader, a lot of times it's not accepted. And so when I think about fearlessness and again, like bringing forth those ideas, but also being willing to step into leadership and take the space and own it is also an act of fearlessness, because a lot of times, for me, I think it's not, an idea or an issue of like understanding the problem. We all know the problems. They've existed for a long time. It's being willing to step up in that space with the courage to say, I actually have an idea, or I've been thinking about a solution, and putting that forth in the world, I think is, really important.
Absolutely. It takes bravery, courageousness to step out and put yourself out there. Dr. Thomas, you bring an international perspective to this discussion. What have you seen in terms of what's been holding women back at an international level, and specifically in Africa?
Thanks for that question. I am newly working with the Africa Bureau, so that's a great question. And I love the dialogue between those two. And I felt that was a very universal perspective for all of us. I can speak from my personal experience about fears that I have observed holding us back. And I think women often have an issue of confidence. And it's really, we can be our own worst critics sometimes. So within the time that I've worked in the State Department, we have a very a formal system of performance evaluation and promotion and bidding on assignments. And when we come together to discuss how women are advancing within that system, what I keep hearing over and over is that women don't take the same risks. They don't put themselves out. They don't ask for challenges. And I think what we all need to do is really silence our inner fears, our inner self-doubts, silence those ideas of not being worthy, not deserving a place at the table, silence that perfectionism that a lot of women feel. And that's why I love the theme of this evening's discussion.
Absolutely. And I think we could all speak from personal experience that sometimes we get in our own way. And we really need to grapple with that. Dr. Green, we had a brief discussion yesterday because we did sort of a preview to today's discussion on our news program on Action News Jax. And one of the things that you talked about was overcoming disappointment and pushing through that. Tell us what has been your experience in your professional life.
Absolutely. First, I want to say, Dr. Thomas, it would be ditto if you were asking me the exact same question. I think fear of failure really stops us from moving forward, whether or a speaking engagement. That failure can lead to disappointment. And for many women, it stops them in their tracks. I have been disappointed a number of times, and I shared with you that I actually ran for an elected office. It was the superintendent in the state of Florida. Some school districts are appointed, and some school districts, they elect a superintendent. And I lost. And for about a minute, I felt like, well, that's the end. I'm never going to try to become a superintendent. I'm not going to go any further. But that disappointment sparked something inside of me. It showed me that, hey, you didn't win, but you raised almost $100,000. You met hundreds and thousands of people that now know your name. So sometimes we need to look for the silver lining in disappointment and from our disappointment. And I have learned so much from that one event, though I'll never run for office again, that I took all of those lessons and have instilled it style. And hopefully, as I lead people, those lessons have come to pay dividends. So we just have to move beyond our disappointments and take those as an opportunity as a lesson, or learn from those opportunities, because you will get another opportunity. And if you learn from those lessons, you'll be more prepared and ready to handle the next situation.
Absolutely. Focusing on the good instead of only looking at the bad, for sure. Before I move into this next question, just on this theme real quick, because I think it's so interesting that Dr. Thomas mentioned trying to be perfectionist. I think so many women have this concept of trying to be perfect, which nobody is perfect. Do you think that is taught from an early age? And just, what can we tell families out there of what they're teaching young girls, if this is something that is taught? Who wants to tackle that?
Well, can I just say that I think that the burden for success and entering the arena the bar is a bit higher for women, and women of color specifically. So even if, women who are super talented, have multiple degrees, have been doing the work for a long time, somehow the bar is set a little bit higher for them than male counterparts. And especially even when I think about my experience as a woman of color leader. So I think what's really amazing, and I have an 11-year-old daughter, is that I do teach her to be fearless and to be ambitious, and to, that she's a smart girl. But it's not what I teach her, it's what the world shows her when she goes out and she tries to exercise those things that teach her her place in the world. And so I think we have a long way to go in terms of challenging those gender stereotypes, societal norms that really hold women back. Because, every woman I know, for the most part, are really, ambitious. They have really great ideas and doing amazing work. And, it's not for lack of trying that they're not successful. It's those other barriers that are, hold them back.
Yes, Dr.
I want to agree with Dr. Mason. One of the things that I try to share with my other leaders in my organization is that you have to be the smartest person in the room, but you don't always have to act like the smartest person in the room. And they look at me with stunned faces, and it's what I mean by that is you need to be on your game at all times. But you, as a woman, you need to show your natural way of having relationships with individuals. You don't always have to be the first to speak up. You don't always have to have the right answer, but you always have to be prepared. So when your door opens, you are ready to walk through with confidence and can handle whether it's going to be disappointment or you become the best thing since sliced bread. By having that level of confidence within yourself, you know perfection when it happens. And perfection doesn't mean perfect. It means that you did everything that was in your plan to do. When working with male colleagues, for many women feel like they have to be perfect. And the funny thing is, for most men, they don't feel that way. And we have to figure out how to have those conversations with women and men. And so for myself, every time I walk in the room, I feel like I'm the smartest person in the room, but I don't have to act like the smartest person. I can show that respect to everyone that I'm having a conversation with. And I believe I get that same level of respect back. And many times I also surprise people because they are just not expecting just out of the blue something that comes out. And don't apologize if you are just awesome. As women, we sometimes want to hang back and apologize for being the best. Don't apologize for it, but you also don't need to boast about being the best.
Amen. That is so true. And I love that you redefined the word perfection, that everybody should have their own definition of that for sure. And there's so many reasons why women may not, succeed as much as they want to succeed, or, what could be holding them back. And that leads me into our next question. Each of our panelists is a leader and has chipped away at the so-called glass ceiling. Using a glass ceiling index, The Economist ranked 29 developed nations based on conditions for working women. The US ranked 19 out of 29 and fell just below the average. Through your lens, ladies, what is the glass ceiling, and how have you worked to chip away at it? And why does this barrier matter to families and nations as a whole? So I'd like to kick this off with Dr. Thomas. You have experience working in the tech industry, one of the most male-dominated fields. What has been your experience breaking through those barriers?
Yeah, it's definitely a male-dominated field in the tech industry. And my experience there was, as Dr. Green mentioned, you have to absolutely be at the top of your game and know your area, your responsibility, just know your stuff. And don't let them, intimidate you, really. But I did find it challenging. So my experience in the tech industry was maybe not typical, but I found people were quite supportive of me as a woman there. I, for a period of time, was a single working mother. People were understanding. I was able to telecommute. This was a long time ago, before everyone was doing it during the pandemic. But the longer term challenge that I found was that while they were glad that I was there and I was the specialist, I didn't feel that I had the same opportunities for advancement that I wanted and that my male counterparts had. And ultimately, I decided I needed to move on so that I could be in a different situation, get more face time, and for just personal satisfaction of what I wanted to be focused on.
I'm curious, why did you feel like you didn't have that, that opportunity to advance compared to your male counterparts? Well,
I felt that a lot of those decisions, the trust that is built up between colleagues when you're in the office together or always, really interacting. And I think this is what the glass ceiling is about for me, is the level of trust that society or an organization puts in you as a woman in terms of whether they're going to give you additional decision-making responsibilities. And so can we break through the barrier to achieve higher levels? So that would be the glass ceiling. Within my area of expertise, I felt, I was the leader in that area, but I felt that so for me, it was partially balancing the family with the career. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that women have, is finding that right balance. And for me, what I needed to do for my family was work from home sometimes and in the office sometimes. And I just didn't feel that I was getting enough of the relationship building in that kind of situation. So while it was good for me personally, for my career, I needed to make a change to something different.
That's so interesting. And I know we have 3 Black women in the room. I know that obviously for women of color, there's a whole nother barrier. And this is interesting because we're coming on the heels of one of the most historic elections where Vice President-elect Kamala Harris has broken one of the highest glass ceilings in the world, really. So while that's a historic achievement, what else needs to be done to make sure that women and women of color, especially too, make sure that they feel welcomed in boardrooms? So Shawana, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, okay. So I guess I'll get a little personal to talk about my own experience of being in boardrooms, which, for the first half of what my career was, I was just a cog in the wheel. And as I decided to, be a bit more a participant of this community that I was trying to come into, and I was being awarded like these opportunities, that was so interesting to me at the time, because I was like, well, why didn't we hear about these things before? But once you kind of get this certain acronym about yourself, or people, especially in my city, feel comfortable with who you are as a leader and being, this Black woman leader, then they're like, oh, let me tell you about these other things that exist, right? For you to be a participant in, and you're like, so here's another door that becomes open to you as you become to walk through it. But you walk through it, and of course, no one else there is representative of your background or sometimes your identity, and they're not bringing you in necessarily as tokenism, but it's a little bit that way, because you fit this field. And so you could either again use that to parlay your own professionality and to still try to make these decisions and choices and be in these rooms and try to engage and bring other people in. But so often what happens is it still becomes this secret battleground place, and to me, parlays of power that only are helpful to people who want to play those games. And so I found that I was not interested in that. As more and more I would either say yes, I would start to question, well, who's on this board, and what role do you see where I am? Am I the person that you need to bring in, especially again as a Black woman? Or is there another Black woman or woman of color or a person of color that I need to introduce you to, because you're just bringing me in because now you're just comfortable with the who that I am? Like I don't need to sit on all these different boards and not be able to make a difference to just say, okay, well, we have someone of color in the room. But where it really becomes active about what are my own passions, how do I use those positions to lead and also put other people back behind me? I think, if we're talking about Senator Harris, now Vice President-elect, Harris coming into this position, what was so magnanimous for her to say again was she's the first, but she's not going to be the last. I think that is so important. And we spoke on this a little bit before within that first conversation that was played. Men have to be a part of this. They have to also lead by designation, and to not just always rely on what are our circles of confidence. Break those circles, and then say, yes, I know this person, or maybe I'm not the best person. I had another friend who's lovely, and she was being invited to be on a committee because she's always this really great person that people want to have. And this time really challenged her to say, yes, I want to help, but maybe my help is to bring other people's awareness around that and not just stopping the buck at me.
Absolutely, opening the doors. And it's not just about checking a box, just to check a box. That does nothing, right? And having an inclusive, work atmosphere does nothing if you're not going to listen to the diverse voices and really, really incorporate that. So, Dr. Mason, would you like to weigh in? What's the message to hiring managers out there if, just checking a box to be diverse doesn't really do anything?
Well, we all know that one woman on a board doesn't change much. More than one woman, 2, 3 women changes the dynamics and the policies and the decisions and how they're made. And women also feel like they have camaraderie and they have solidarity with those women, hopefully. When I think, so I lead a, national think tank. I am the youngest person to lead a think tank in Washington, D.C., but also one of few women of color. And usually women of color are the subject of research and not necessarily leading the research agenda and shaping ideas. And so, and shaping organizational agendas. And so, one woman, I was ready for the role, but it has been a really difficult trek. And so a white woman said, Nicole, you're just doing, great things with the organization. And I said, Anne, her name is Anne. I said, Anne, I've always been able to do this whole time. I said, it's just about having the opportunity and space to lead and for people to get out of the way and allow, women of color, the space to actualize what they know to be true about themselves. And that space doesn't happen that often, but you see the awesomeness when it does, like Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris, when women lead, even globally on the pandemic, it makes a difference, but it's just really providing that opportunity and space for them to be able to do that.
Absolutely. You got to create that space and help people feel welcome. That kind of leads us into the next question too, which is about support systems. Pat Mitchell, the first female president of CNN Productions and PBS, as well as the first woman to host a nationally syndicated daily talk show, said that mentoring is one lever that we can activate to advance more women in their work, to help them gain access to capital and economic opportunities and that they might otherwise miss, and to be better prepared to opportunities when they come. Can you share some mentoring experiences that help shape your trajectory as leaders in your field and share your philosophy about mentoring in today's world? How can more women take advantage of mentoring relationships? Dr. Green, we'll start with you. If you could unmute yourself, please, Dr. Green. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Every time. It gets me off.
It really is very challenging in specifically in my field. Only 12% of all superintendents are women. And of the 12% women, only 2% are African American women. So there's really not that many mentors to reach out to. And so I know this sounds quite interesting. So you start looking for mentors, whether they're male or female. I wanted to be in executive leadership. And since there weren't any women, I watched the men. I watched what they did. I didn't exactly do what they did, but I at least saw the roles that they played when they would be in the boardroom. I saw the things that they did to speak with school-based administrators. So one of the things that I've been committed to is anytime someone asks me, would you mentor me? I say yes, but I do give conditions. They need to know that one, more of the work will be on their part. I'm here just as a sounding board and someone that they can to talk to. So when a principal tells me, I want to go higher in the organization, I say, that's wonderful. Tell me what it is you want to accomplish. And so I give them homework. I say, okay, well, if this is what you want, I need you to come back with 3 really strong reasons why this is what you want. And they look at me and then they come back. And when they can't really express to me the 3 reasons why you really want to be, well, let's just say superintendent, I talk to them about, well, this comes with sacrifice. I know that for women, that word balance, for me, that word doesn't exist because there is no balance. There are times that I am completely dedicated to my family and they know it and they're there and we support one another. But then there are times related to my career that they know, hey, for this week, somebody better pick up a frying pan and cook because I'm not. Because I'm not going to be home to do those things. So, leadership does require sacrifice. And I'm sure for men that their sacrifice might be different, but for women, you just, as they said in the earlier video, don't go in blindsided. I don't want to tell you how wonderful it is, but not tell you, hey, these are all the things that you have to do to get to the good part. As a former track athlete, I actually went to college on a track scholarship. My coach used to say, winning is always done during practice. Hey, practice, all the hard part is done up front. The winning part is somewhat more the easier part because you are prepared. You have done everything to get you into this position. So I truly believe women need to step up and support one another more. I'm probably one of the only school districts in the nation that my senior level executives are all women. The deputy superintendent is a woman, chief of staff is a woman. And I did that purposely to show the women in my district, you can get to that top leadership position. I value the men in our organization and we work very well as a team. But I think sometimes when we get to that place of leadership, we become fearful to reach out to others, to lift others up for the fear of what people will say. And I just think we have to be out there more in front and being able to reach back and help more women to get to their greatest potential.
Absolutely. I love that you give your mentees homework, like a good educator that you are. I love that. That's awesome. And so you're okay with people coming up to you and saying, hey, would you mentor me? Because I've heard different advice. I've heard people say, let somebody come up to you and show interest in you, or, instead of going up to them. And so I personally think it's a good idea to go up to somebody and show initiative. So I don't know if you ladies have advice on that, like for people who maybe, because I've struggled with that too. Sometimes I'm shy to like bother somebody, but what do you ladies think? Shawana, yeah, you want to?
So again, like my situation is, I think a little bit interesting in the fact that when I decided I wanted to become a curator in this way, I didn't really have that many examples or ways to like just go out, initially, you said before, and ask people. I didn't even think that was something to do. What I was so, revved up on was that, okay, how do I again, create these opportunities for myself? Was it like, going and talking to like the local pizzeria, and saying like, hey, I have this idea, like, can you please let me curate this work that you keep putting up here, that it could be a little bit more, interesting if you let me program it. And I think through that, I got like really excited, and it was like, oh, okay, so like, there are these other people who do this thing. And I don't even think, I wasn't calling myself a curator at the time because, again, I was not comfortable. And I knew what that entailed a little bit. And I knew I did not do any of that on that pathway. So I was very much, just trying to make a space to say, again, how can I be in the room to advocate for these other people who I'm hearing they have concerns and they're not going out and talking to anybody, like literally just that. Like, I think one of my favorite movies is like, How to Be Successful in Business Without like trying. Like, I love that musical. And it is a lot about social relationships. So I thought, again, through a little bit of the charismatic stuff that I am, how can I just at least ask somebody for lunch? How could I, talk to them? How could I tell them about this idea that I had? And it really became a lot of that. I remember going to a meeting at the time. And as I started doing a little bit more homework, realizing that you could just come into these meetings and be like, this individual in person, because they were public, right? Like these public meetings, seeing every executive director that I was thinking of trying to talk to in like one room. And I like freaked out. I was like, here they all are. Here they all like having a meeting in the middle of the day. And I'm looking around like, why isn't everybody here? Because they're saying, okay, I'm so interested in these ideas. How do you can people come and talk to me? And that literally is what I started doing. I started putting myself out there. I started like talking to people, trying to get them engaged. And then they started opening up again, other opportunities for me by doing that. But then when I did think that, okay, I would love to have somebody who could help to mentee, me and really lead me in the right direction. What was so interesting to me, because people had this idea of you taking this initiative, that they were like, oh, you're good. Like, you're amazing. You don't need a mentor. Like, like you should be mentoring me. And I thought that's the interesting thing that I think sometimes happens again to Black women, to women of color, is now that I am asking for help, you're still not hearing me. You're still not, stepping up in the ways that I need you to, when I'm literally saying that I need this help. And it becomes, again, that strong Black woman persona that, like, you've got it. And like, you're going to make a way out of no way. And I'm like, I don't think I should have to do those things, because there clearly are ways out of the ways. And so having people, either really pressing on them to say, yes, I need your help right now. Or again, to say, just because, again, you see me being in this role, I'm going to let you know how I see myself, and continue to ask for the things, but still not being scared to initiate, still not being scared to have failures. Like I always say, I don't think of the word failure. I think it's a learning experience. So now you've learned this way, so hopefully you won't go and do it another way. But, more than that, I thought it was so interesting when you're trying to step up, when you're getting into these roles, when you're, again, being brought into these rooms, and it could feel a little bit quick for you. To say that you don't want to say that and then, get booted out because you've gotten this far. But there's this balance of, just being inquisitive, that I don't think anything is wrong with that, and questioning things that you don't understand, even when you're supposed to be like the expert, or, just talking it out with other people who are in the room, because why else are they in the room with you if they're not going to expand your ideas?
Absolutely. Yeah. I never want to be surrounded by yes people. Like if I'm asking you for an opinion, it's because I want to know your opinion. Like, I don't just tell me just to agree with me. Like, I want to know, right? Absolutely. And you mentioned something super interesting, relationships. I think every business, no matter what it is about those relationships. And I really think that, obviously women can benefit from mentorship as well. Dr. Thomas or Dr. Mason, would you like to weigh in on your experience, how mentorship has helped you both in your careers?
Well, so I believe mentoring relationships are organic, and when I think about the younger women who are in my life, or even peers, in that way, the relationship develops very organically, sparked from a conversation or relationship. So I think that's important. One of the things I want to bring up is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I think there's a big difference. Mentorship for me is a bit limiting, and is about like giving and receiving advice. What do you think about this? Sponsorship, I think both are really important, but sponsorship is really about opening that door, and for a person who has not made it to that next level, being able to vouch for them and say, this person I think would be amazing in this role. Or when they're not in the room, saying, hey, I know the right person for that role. That is sponsorship. And that's a little bit different from mentorship. And so while I value mentorship, and I, in my life, it's been really critically important, but, also thinking about how we provide that sort of sponsorship for women leaders, because, men do it all the time. Men do it all the time. And so really getting women, into their comfort zone so that they can also do that for other women, and lift them up in that way.
Such a good point. Definitely looking at things more of like a ladder, like you're climbing the ladder, but there's people coming behind you too. Help them up. Dr. Thomas, what do you think?
Yeah, I just want to add, for me, that mentorship has been very much situational. So depending on whatever situation I'm in, the person who can function as a mentor and help me navigate the way through, it changes depending on what I'm looking at, what situation I'm in. So I also think it's really important to reach out and ask questions and ask for help when you need it, because it's in asking for help that I start building a relationship. And then, in my experience, at least, people are very happy to offer advice. But in the asking, I've seen you start to build a relationship that helps open doors, like Shawana was saying before.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Just ask. The worst that can happen is somebody may not be able to help you, but then go on to the next person and keep asking. Definitely don't be afraid. And you know what? Our next topic is something that a lot of women struggle with, and that is the pay gap. And so all over the world, men earn on average more than women. A lot of different reasons for this. Based on 2018 US Census data, women of all races earned on average just 82 cents for every dollar that men of all races earned. When the data was broken down by race, the pay disparities for minority women and women of color are even worse, with Black women earning on average 62 cents per male earned dollar and Hispanic women earning an average of 52 cents per male earned dollar. This extrapolates to earning about $407,760 less than a man over a 40-year career. Just mind-boggling. Based on your experiences, what issues must be addressed to eliminate the pay gap for women? Dr. Green, we'll begin with you. Hit that unmute button, please, for us.
Me and the mute button. We're having.
I hate that mute button.
In my field, it's a little different, especially for educators. They're on a salary schedule, so there isn't very much of a variance in the pay for women versus men. However, the higher you move up in our system, the more likely women will be paid less than men. And that's something women need to be cognizant of, because you don't have to accept it. When I first became deputy superintendent in another school district, the other deputy superintendent was a man, and he started maybe 6 months earlier than I did. And he was making at the top of the salary schedule. And then when I became deputy superintendent, I was at the bottom of the salary schedule. And here is an example of women, protecting, if you will, or having that relationship to go and talk to someone. Someone in finance came and told me, did you know that you're making, I'll throw out $10,000 less than the person who's doing the same job? And oh, by the way, you have a higher degree than he does. So I talked to myself several times to work up the courage, and I went into the superintendent's office, and I just stated, the other deputy superintendent makes $10,000 more than I do. Can you explain to me why? And he could not. And so I said, then I should be making the exact same thing that he is. And the next day, I signed a new contract that had me making the same as the other deputy superintendent. So my point is, sometimes we're not in the know of the difference of salaries, especially when you're maybe in the same field. But once you know, then again, you have to be the smartest person in the room. I just went to the superintendent, and I could have come in there and banged my fist on his desk and say, why am I not making the same? I just asked a very simple question. This other person is making $10,000 more than me. Is there a reason? And when he could not give me a good reason, then I stated, we're doing the same position. I feel, and I have a higher degree than he does, I feel I should make the same as him. So sometimes we have to be assertive and demand that we are making the same. But many times we just don't know we're not making the same. And as women, if we're pleased and happy in our job, sometimes we underestimate our value. And many women, we don't do jobs all for the money, but if you are in a position of leadership, you bring value, and don't underestimate it, and demand the value that you are bringing to that job should be matched financially.
Amazing, amazing story. That is awesome. I see everybody shaking their head. I know that this is such an important topic, and I wish we had all day to talk about it too. But so we'll go around the room here and ask all of you ladies to weigh in on this. Thank you, Dr. Green. Dr. Mason, would you like to tell us your experience?
Well, this is actually one of the issues that IWPR knows really well. And even when women negotiate higher salaries, it just doesn't shake out that way. I think that is a great example of, you know, something that worked out right. But, you know, across the board, there's a general devaluation of women's work. It doesn't, across sectors, it doesn't really matter. In terms of negotiating pay equity, women can be empowered or feel empowered, but pay secrecy is really real. And we've seen, even with the U.S. women's soccer team, where they've demanded equal pay, and they've come back, and their argument was that men are superior soccer players, and that's why they're making more and earning more money. So it just, the burden, I think, on women is really high to prove their value and their contribution. And a lot of women internalize it and blame themselves for not earning what they're worth, when in fact it's a structural and institutional issue. So for me, you know, personally, when I was applying for this job here, I was told by the recruiter, I said, well, I'm going to ask for the maximum salary. And then she said, well, I don't think you should. I said, well, why wouldn't I? I mean, if there's a maximum, why would I ask for something below the maximum salary? If I, you know, even as, you know, I'm a single mother of twins. It's like, and then I just I was silent, and she said, well, maybe I understand why you would want the maximum. I said, yeah. And so I sat in that discomfort with her and didn't allow that, to own that and say, well, maybe you're right, I don't deserve it. Or maybe, you know, I just said, well, you know, a lot of times we blame women for not asking for what they're worth, or leaning in, or doing all these things, but that's actually ridiculous. I put the blame where it belongs. It's on employers who have bad hiring practices and sexism, and, you know, devalue women's work.
Absolutely. They're the ones with the information, right? Like Dr. Green said, sometimes we just don't know, and they have the information right in front of them, the hiring managers, right? And you mentioned that, you know, there's structural issues for this. I'm curious, how much, you know, in your field, you have this research, like how much does policy and government may play a role? Like how could we maybe as women change this, maybe perhaps by going to the voting booth?
Well, I mean, you know, absolutely. The Paycheck Fairness Act, which encourages paycheck transparency. The truth of the matter is we don't really know how big the gap is, because employers don't have to disclose what they're paying women. And so we've been fighting to release that data so that we actually know how big the disparity is. And, you know, actually there's retaliation for women who, want to discuss, their pay, and there's whole campaigns. So, you know, kudos to the finance person who disclosed to Dr. Green that there was a pay discrepancy, but that doesn't happen, you know, often. And many times women don't find out they're being paid, you know, much less than a male colleague, or even, you know, as a woman of color, by the way, we get paid less for, you know, compared to white women who are doing comparable jobs. I've been in more than one position where I have a PhD, and a white woman who's, you know, has a bachelor's with much less experience is earning more than me. And as a leader in an organization, it just doesn't happen on my watch. I can tell you that much. If you have a PhD, you're a woman of color, you're going to make what you're worth. And that's a really deliberate decision. I just want to say, there was a woman of color who was applying to a job, and she wasn't going to negotiate her salary, but I knew I could go higher. I took off my CEO hat and I said, let me just tell you something. I'm going to teach you how to negotiate your salary. And that was a teachable moment for her. And I was just like, I'm not going to do this, because what'll happen is that it'll track you and you'll be making less earnings from here on out, but I'm going to, you know, tell you how to do this. And so just being able to do that and step outside of ourselves, and in that moment, do that work.
Amazing. And wow, yeah, absolutely. I've seen CEOs of major companies, some of them come out, have made the news that they're going to make sure that there's pay equity in their firm. So the hiring managers out there watching, you have the power to change this and make sure that, you know, this doesn't happen. Dr. Thomas, you have an international perspective on this. How does this work in other countries?
Yeah, there are other countries out there that have done a lot better at this than we have. I went to school in Sweden. That's where I did my my undergraduate and graduate work. And, you know, they have introduced legislation and social supports for the family, right? And this enables women to stay in the workforce. They can take parental leave. They still have the job when they're ready to go back. There is universal daycare. And it doesn't just apply for women. Men have the same rights. And I firmly believe that we need to include men in this as well. Their role needs to adjust a little bit in terms of the family and all of those responsibilities. In terms of the other places where I've worked, I would say, so I worked in Uzbekistan and in India, and there, while you have some high-powered women, I suspect that the pay gap is a lot worse than it is here, because the societal and family expectations on women being the caretakers and not being in the workforce is so much stronger than here. So I guess the point that I would say is that we need to keep fighting for our own worth being recognized by our employers, by our society, and we can help bring women in other countries along as well, and we can learn from some countries.
Absolutely. This is a global problem, not just in the United States, for sure. Shawana, I want to bring you into this conversation. Tell us about your perspective from the arts world too, and how does this play out there?
So yeah, I thank Dr. Green so much, Dr. Mason and Dr. Thomas, for those words, because a little bit all those triggers for me, thinking about in some of the rooms that I've been in before and had to, did not know that this was a thing, right? Even we talked about having someone tell you, you can negotiate your salary, you can ask for more. It was again, I think the arts have always served me in seeing this in movies. And I was like, okay, so this is what you can do. Interestingly enough, in my career with working with government, it was interesting in the way that, they kind of recruited me in a way. I came into this space. I helped to really build this program. And I think so much what Dr. Green just said before, I loved my job. I loved my job so much that, yes, I understood that I was not being paid at all, worth my value, but I felt like I was doing this purposeful thing that was going to be bigger than myself. So when it finally became time to, first give me the proper title of the work that I was doing, because I was this glorified person in this other title that had nothing to do with my job. And this is the way times government work is, and working with those kind of, institutions and how they really see, again, how everything is systematically controlled, knowing that in this environment, people who had, again, master's degree were the only people who were going to be able to be managers. So already knowing that you had this governance of you, where your degree or your value of that was going to already determine the way that you could advance. And here I was in this job that was, again, created specifically for what I was doing. There was no way really to advance within it. And then when it came time to actually get the right title and get a salary, I was, again, after I had been doing this job and also had to then reapply for it, refight for it, for people who were like, oh, this is a job now that is going to be a real thing. And other people wanted it, even though I had been doing all the work to say that this was going to be a realistic position. And then after doing that, being offered, again, the lowest in that salary range, even after I had requested, quite something that was in the median. And I had to take this all the way up to the director at the time to sit down with him, and to try to control my emotions in this room where I felt, so, disengaged, in this process and what I was told and how it was going to be done, and just kind of alienated for how did you all come up with this figure when clearly, if you look at the other institutions by us, you see what, incoming curators make, how this could be done. And I was just very hurt to see that that wasn't what was happening. And then to have, them just basically kind of just say, well, this is this thing. And you could come into it and then we could try it again in 6 months. And I was like, that's the best offer that we have. You're going to say, oh yeah, you can, we still want you here. We still want you to do this thing, but we want you to still do it at this very lower rate, even though we know you should be higher value. And then we can discuss this again. So I think also what's important to add to this conversation, Lorena, is when you have to say goodbye, when you have to say no to what doesn't serve you anymore. that was super scary. Again, I loved what I was doing. I loved how it was being interacted. The work was seamless and engaged me in all the ways that I really felt my creative force was driving. But I knew I could no longer continue to do it for an institution that I did not feel valued my work at all. I had just had a child, also, in these unique ways that gender roles are changing. My husband is an amazing artist, and that definitely, can serve, and it pays our bills. But I am the primary breadwinner, and I had to think the fact that I'm helping to take care of our household. I just had a child. I didn't want to say to, like my son, as he got older, like, why am I still doing this thing? And studies have shown again that where you come in sometimes as an employee is where you stay over the years, regardless of how many, years you work for. And I had already did that. I had already worked for someone for over a decade, thinking that I would be valued in that way. So I knew this was not going to stand anymore. You have to say no, and sometimes step out on your own to figure out what's that process and ways. And so I think that's where I really found uniquely my own way to kind of break through these barriers and to face my own fears and to redesign these own rooms, because I had to think about what was my value, what was I really bringing to not only this institution, but to my entire city. And if I'm able to do that, if people are able to want to work with me and want to do these things, then they should also be able to do that with me as a consultant to that work and then bring me in. And then knowing then I could set my own terms and my own price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I'm listening to myself too when you're talking, because these are all the things that I say in my head too. And it's like, I'm passionate about this job. I love it. I want to stay in it, but I'm not getting what I deserve. And what do I do? It's scary. It's absolutely scary, but you're absolutely right. There's so much power in saying no. And we have to leverage that. Like, we can say no, and it's okay to walk away if you're not being compensated the way you should be. So bravo to all you ladies. That was awesome. And I really hope a lot of people took something away from that. I think that topic deserves a whole a panel on its own, like just talking about that. But you know what, Shawana, we'll stay with you because I have a question specifically for you. So last year in an interview with Airbus Magazine, you mentioned a famous quote from the first African-American woman elected to the United States Congress, Shirley Chisholm. Her empowering words: "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." That has served as a sort of compass for you, that quote. So in your experience, what does bringing your own chair involve?
Yeah, that is like, I love Shirley Chisholm for that. And I think that has really tried to serve, again, my instinct for the rooms that I go into. Because like we just said before, so often you're this representative, or they're looking for you to fill all these different roles. And because they only want just that thing, they're not willing to, have other people come into that situation. One thing that I can really think of is there was this exhibition that was going to happen, and my husband had got wind of it from another artist. So we were so used to kind of going in as this pair, being like, we were supporting one another. We're partners. We work together. And pretty much that was done just organically in every space. Yet when we got invited, and we didn't really get all the way invited, but we kind of pushed our way into this room. He was invited in, and I was asked to sit down in like this waiting room. And at first I got ready to like rally and to be like, nope, like we're together, we're going into this thing. Like, this is the way it has to be. But I didn't want to mess up this opportunity for him. And so I decided to kind of like bow out. But I remember on my way kind of passing and peering into the room, so many people I knew were like, waving and saying things to me. So then in the end, the executive director at the time of this museum, came and wanted to, speak to me, because I guess she was curious of like, how do all these other people know who this person is? And I took that extreme opportunity to say that the next time that something happens, I would like to be invited in to this discussion, that I will be coming with my husband this next thing. And literally, I remember they didn't have enough chairs because they weren't expecting me to be there. And I just politely just pulled one and said, I will sit in this table. I will sit at this chair, but I will also sit at this table though. Don't be afraid to go outside that room to see an available chair. If this is a space that you think you need to be in, and that, your intelligence is going to help to guide the conversation, is going to bring out something really meaningful, ask to be in that room. But if also they don't let you be in that room, try to think of another room that you need to set up on your own terms and invite those around who want to be where you are. Another quote that I love to always say is like, you go where you're celebrated. I don't pay attention to negative sayers, or I love when people talk about their haters. And I'm always like, why are you talking about people who are not serving in your own, instinct and passion and purpose? I'm not going to give my intelligence or my energy to propagating those folks. They do not inspire me. Hate does not, or negativity does not inspire me in that way. So I'm looking for the folks who are celebrating me, celebrating that work, and wanting to hear those designations. So yeah, don't be afraid to, even better than that folding chair, just bring that rolly chair on in there and sit down and, make your voice heard if it's something meaningful that you need to say.
Absolutely. If there's no chair, even if there's no table, you make your own table, you make your own chair, you get there. I love it. I always say, you know what, if you have haters, then you're doing something right. Dr. Thomas, what does bringing your own chair mean to you?
Well, it means coming in and having an opinion about what's going on, being informed, and then being willing to share that opinion. Yeah. So what I would say from my work internationally about bringing your own chair. So in Uzbekistan, when I was working there, this is a very traditional society. Workplace is very male dominated. And when I was there at the embassy, we were fortunate to have a number of senior scientists and specialists, PhDs, come visit us. These were American scientists who we were bringing over. They were coming over to lecture at universities and meet with decision makers, policy makers, and share some of the scientific technical expertise that we have here in the US. And it happened that many of these people who came over were women. And so, and we had a woman ambassador also. And she was an amazing leader. And so we would go to meetings with the local government there in Uzbekistan, and on their side of the table would be all men, and on our side of the table would be all women. And at first I was a little intimidated, felt a little weird about it. And then I just gave up that feeling, because we were there offering something that could help them. And, they could either accept it or not. And they had to sit there and listen. And ultimately they got the benefit of hearing from our scientists. And what stood out for me, what I took away from this as super enjoyable and kind of what makes my work wonderful, is that not only were we helping them with their economic development or their health policy or education in the sciences, we were modeling that women can make it to the highest levels in all of these areas. So I would quote Mahatma Gandhi here that we have to be the change that we want to see.
Absolutely. And CEOs of companies and other organizations need to realize that the more voices are in a room, the better. I mean, especially if they're diverse voices, for sure. Dr. Mason, what do you think? What does bringing your own chair mean to you?
When I think about this very famous statement by Shirley Chisholm, one of the things I think about is why would she say something like that? What inspired her to say that in the first place? And it's the idea that the systems and structures and the power systems were not built for her. And so again, looping back to the very front of this, event where we talk about being fearless. So to pull up a seat to a place where you're not supposed to be, or people don't think you belong, is an act of fearlessness and courage. And so when I think about that, I think about, those, situations, those moments where, you're not supposed to be there, but you show up anyway with grace. Like Shawana said, you just show up and say, it's okay. You didn't intend for me to be here, but here I am. And you do it with, the grace and with your head held high, and just, roll up your sleeves and do the work. And so when I think about that statement, that's what, it means to me.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. Dr. Green, you mentioned earlier, less than 2% of superintendents across the country are Black women. You definitely brought your chair for sure, your whole table. How was that experience for you? Well, what does that statement mean for you?
Well, Nicole really coined it quite wonderfully. I would just say ditto to everything that she said. But one of the things that I try to share with our other leaders in our organization is sometimes when you bring your chair to the table, you're supposed to listen and watch and observe. And when it's time for you to then have that chair maybe move from the side of the table to the head of the table, you are prepared to then lead. So bringing your own chair to the table for me is get to the table. Once you're there, look like you're supposed to be there, listen, and then when that chair makes its way to the head of the table, you just need to be prepared to lead. For my organization, a lot of what we do has to do with relationships. And the higher you go up in the organization, the more relationships you have to have with people that you may not interact on a day-to-day basis. You may not live in their neighborhood. You may not go to the places they go. And sometimes you have to reinvent yourself. And it's a decision. I tell everyone, you have to make that decision. So when I decided to reinvent myself so that when I brought my chair to the table, I felt I could interact with the other people at that table. One of the things, I went and learned how to play golf. It was something I felt, this is reinventing myself. This is something I felt like I can now have a conversation with someone that I normally don't interact with and who probably don't believe that I have that knowledge about golf, and be able now to have a common ground of something we can talk about. So it isn't directly related to bringing your own chair, but be prepared to, again, you have to have relationships and you have to be able to come outside your comfort zone. And so it's about reinventing yourself each and every day. You don't have to take up golf. I just chose to do that. But I also chose to take up tennis. And now I have a group of women that I'm very close friends with that I probably never would have been friends with unless I had taken up tennis. And now we have something we can talk about. We find that we have more in common than not. We find that though we have differences in our lives, we have very similar problems. If you're married, you have marital issues if you have children, you have children issues. You start to figure out, hey, we have a lot more in common than we do differently, but we also embrace each other's differences. So I think part of bringing your own chair to the table is once you get there, be prepared.
I love that. I love that. That's cool. I should take up learning those two sports too. Always wanted to, never had a chance. So that I love that. I love that analogy there. This next question kind of brings up, it's in the same thread sort of. So the World Economic Forum ranks the US as 51st in terms of gender equality out of 149 countries. That is 65% of nations ranked higher than the United States. Among foreign nations, Iceland has the highest percentage of female board members, 44%. And Thailand has the highest share of women among the principal owners of firms at 64.4%. To date, about 59 countries have had female heads of state, while the US has never had a female president. Dr. Thomas, as a diplomat and you are often in a position of exchanging ideas with diverse stakeholders in foreign nations. Through your work as a diplomat, have you likely observed infrastructural and societal factors that stand as barriers for women? And perhaps you have also observed strategies or practices that could be useful for us to adopt here in the US to better empower women and close that gender gap, as we were just talking about. So you briefly touched on this earlier, but how can other countries help us here in the US?
Yeah, so a great question. I think there are a lot of similarities. Like Dr. Green was saying, we face similar types of problems. We have, of course, differences as well. So, and I've served, so Uzbekistan I talked about. In India, there's a very different situation in the family, the role of the family in society and expectations within the family, as well as power dynamics within the family. And so all of those things can serve to keep women in kind of the low person on the totem pole, being brought into the man's family to basically take care of everything in the household and his parents and so forth. But for families who can support women in going out and being in the family business, the connections and the family ties are often very supportive. And one thing definitely that I saw in Uzbekistan, they are also, as in India, often you have multi-generational households. So you'll have very often 3 generations, sometimes more. And those close family ties can be a real support system for women. Working age women in Uzbekistan frequently are out there earning money, working jobs. And I had colleagues when we would go off and have meetings at night or on a weekend sometime, and I would just ask, who will be watching your kid while we're out doing this? Oh, they say, oh, no problem. My mom's home, or my aunt, or whoever. There's always someone around. So they are freed up to go and pursue their careers and their lives. That doesn't at all detract from the rest of the institutional and societal challenges that they face. But if they want to do that, they do have a network. And I would say that's one of the things that we in this country struggle with. We live in small family units. We live at a distance from our more extended families often. And so if we don't have those support systems kind of built in, then we need to figure out how to recreate those networks, those support systems, right? Whether it be other women who you can become friends with, who you can provide mutual support to, or your neighbors or other families who have kids. All of those things can help to recreate that support for families and mothers in the family role in the way that the Scandinavian countries have done through kind of their laws and social programs. We don't have those, but we can do it in other ways. And I think that's the main takeaway that I've seen.
Absolutely. And if more women have that kind of freedom, just imagine how much better off our economy would be, for example, if we have more women in the tech world, more engineers, more whatever the profession is, like if women just weren't held back. So I often think about that. Absolutely. And, I always feel it's a shame when you have highly educated, motivated women and they choose to leave the workforce. Maybe it's a personal choice, and that's fine if that's what they want to do. But if it's an economic choice that it doesn't make sense for them to work, then that's where I really feel that we as a culture should be doing better. Because time out of the workforce is going to impact their future earnings. And the vast majority of men don't have to think about that. I know. Yeah. And that's definitely, something that we all as a society, because we can't do it alone. We need help. And I also think about a lot of women are the CEOs of their families, right? So they have the skill set. So Dr. Mason, would you like to weigh in with your experience with research on this topic?
Yeah. So the bottom line is America is horrible in terms of women's representation at all levels, both at the CEO level as well as representation and legislation. Women are 50% of the population, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be holding at least 50% of the seats in Congress or in leadership positions. There are a lot of reasons for this, but many of those reasons are really sexism, institutional and structural barriers that keep women out of these positions. Also women are do 32% more caretaking responsibilities than their male counterparts, by the way. And during COVID, women are not only having to homeschool, I'm talking about myself, so this is personal experience as well, but expected to work 40 to 50 hours a week. And you know what, that's impossible. And so, just shout out to women who are just really holding up, half the sky on, in a lot of areas, but are not getting the credit. And so I do think that America, US, we have a lot of work to do. I'm very excited about Kamala Harris and her, she's now vice president, and she said, Shawana said this earlier. She said, I won't be the first, I won't be the last, I'm the first, but I won't be the last. And so we celebrated as like, that's amazing. But some people heard that as a threat. Some people are not excited about that. And so, how do we support women's leadership? How do we lift it up? How do we make sure that she has the support? Because there will be missteps, and, the missteps that women, have are often magnified and, made a bigger deal than they are. Nancy Pelosi's, Salongate took up a lot of airspace, just, a couple months ago. So, the United States just needs to do better.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot that we can learn for sure. And Dr. Mason, stay with you because, and we do have some questions from the audience too that we're going to get to. I see Lourdes came up here too. Do we have time to go through the last two questions I have for the panel before the audience questions? Perfect. Okay, I got a nod. Okay, perfect. And Dr. Mason, we'll stay with you because this next question specifically for you. A lot of people haven't heard of the word intersectionality, and it has been used since 1980s. But it's a term that is still unfamiliar to many. Intersectionality refers to the complex ways different forms of discrimination combine, overlap, or intersect. We've been touching on this all night. So share with us how intersectionality impacts you or those you serve.
Well, quite simply, when we were talking about the pay gap earlier, that's intersectionality. The difference, your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your religion, your ethnicity, the way it impacts you in your life experiences, the opportunities you have, your life chances, that's intersectionality. We all live at the intersections, both, not only women of color, but white women, white men. Everybody has an intersecting identity. But it matters because in society, we value certain identities. So the closer you are to, in this instance, white maleness, the more power and access to resources you have, and the further away you are, the less power, access, and opportunity you have. And we see that very clearly in an example like the, pay equity.
Absolutely. And there's so many different reasons that we'll be talking about. And, I hesitate to oversimplify things, but, with the time that we have, I think we've hit a lot of the reasons why women sometimes are held back. And before we get into the audience questions here, Dr. Green, I have one final question for you. So as a superintendent, and we've been talking about this, of one of the nation's largest public school districts, and as a woman of color, you are a unicorn in education. I believe you said earlier, too, that less than 2% of superintendents are women of color and only 33% of superintendents are women. So obviously, this is shocking for a lot of people to hear because so many teachers are women in the education world. So 76% to be exact, K through 12 are women, are women educators. So why aren't women making it into the upper echelons of public school leadership? And what can we do about it?
Well, there's so many reasons why women don't make it into the upper echelons of school leadership. And I think one has to do with family. Women, when we have families, whether your support system is not there to help you, just like Nicole, which Nicole cracks me up. I'm telling you, you do not have to worry about how Nicole feels, because I think she will let you know. Nicole is a single parent. And as she said, right now during COVID, she's having to be a teacher, homeschool teacher, and try to do her job at the same time. So family, I think, is one reason not as many women teachers try to move up the ladder to make it to the position where I am today. Secondly, I think confidence. Thinking that, you know, I'm just a teacher. Anytime teachers say that to me, I tell them immediately, do not say I'm just a teacher. Once again, we are undervaluing our role or devaluing the role of an educator. And to go to that next level, again, you have to come out of your comfort zone. You have to do other things. You have to go back to school. You get a master's degree, and then compete just like everyone else. I think again, women, we have a hard time competing. We have a hard time being the smartest person in the room, and not ashamed of being the smartest person in the room. And third, I think disappointment. You're probably not going to get the very first job that you apply for. Very few individuals do. And again, learn from that disappointment. If you didn't do well in the interview, I always tell people who are applying for principalship positions, when you don't get the position, go back and ask for feedback. Go back and look at your documents where people wrote down what you said. And if you are able to talk to the individuals who interviewed you, find out what were the things that you did well and what were the things that you need to work on. So I think there's a number of reasons why female teachers don't move that far up the ladder in education. One, again, it's male dominated once you get beyond the classroom. And two, as Shawana said, from the quote from Shirley Chisholm, if there isn't a chair, bring your own chair. And the one thing we didn't talk about bringing your own chair, it's okay if you bring a pretty chair. You don't have to bring the same chair that the men are sitting in. Be who you are. So my chair is always in some 4-inch heels that look like that's something I love to do. I love to wear heels. I love to wear dresses. So my chair is going to look different than probably all the other chairs sitting around that table. And don't be ashamed of being different. Be professional, but don't be afraid to be different. And I think for some women, they believe there's this mold that exists, and if they don't fit that mold, they can't go any further. And it's not true. You have to work at it, and it will take time, but you can break the mold, and you can be, if you desire, superintendent of schools. You can be the superintendent of 20th largest school district if you desire.
Absolutely. And you can do it wearing 4-inch heels.
Absolutely.
I love it. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I loved the panel discussion. It was so great. I do want to leave time for our audience questions. I hear that we got a few questions, which is super exciting. So Lourdes, what you got?
So we've had some wonderful questions from our audience. And Lorena, I know you probably thought you were going to get off the hook here and not have a question posed to you. So let's turn the tide here a little bit. I do have a question for you specifically. And I like the sentiment of it. So in what ways is your bilingualism an asset and or a liability in your career?
That is an interesting question. Yeah, it's always funny when the tables turn. Now I'm being interviewed. I use my being bilingual. Spanish was my first language. I grew up speaking Spanish in my home. My parents are Cuban immigrants. I'm first generation American. My parents to this day don't speak any English. They struggle with it their whole lives. That I wear my language and if I have an accent or not, like a badge of honor, because like Dr. Green was saying, it's okay to be different. That makes me different and that makes me stand out. And so I don't ever see it as a liability, actually. It's only helped me. I have been able to get interviews that other people haven't been able to get simply because I speak Spanish. So I use that to my advantage, and I use that to tell the story of my community. And it's amazing how many people reach out to me saying, thank you for representing us. Representation, and we didn't talk about this so much, but that is such a huge thing. Seeing that representation is really big for a lot of women. And so I don't see it ever as a liability. Use whatever you're different at, whatever you're good at. That's your badge of honor, and wear it proud.
That's really, I love that story, to wear your badge of honor. Let that be your pride. That's a great message for people. We actually have a question that sort of ties into that point. One of our attendees states that it would be so nice to have the girls at their school hear that it's okay to be smart. I think this is building off what you had said, Dr. Green. And even the smartest person in the room, they need to know this to help build their confidence and believe in their academic and creative abilities. So how can we better send this message to young girls at earlier stages in their development? That is, at an age when they are developing their self-image and that internal dialogue?
Well, I have to be truthful, it is very challenging because we have such competing interests. Social media, television, they see these different messages more often than they are in the classroom with their teachers. And so it really is about developing a positive relationship with our girls. Unfortunately, in my district, I have thousands of young women who are not in positive relationships, whether that's at home or with a boyfriend or someone in their life is not being positive with them. And we do this thing called Wellness Wednesday in our school district. And during Wellness Wednesday is this thing called self-love. And how do we teach young girls to love themselves? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your size, that you are a valuable person. If you love yourself, others will be drawn to love you. But even if they're not, if you love yourself, you're going to be able to take yourself to places that you wouldn't imagine. But it is a challenge. And when we talk to parents, they say it's a challenge. And I believe it's a challenge because social media, to me, is like the devil. I mean, it has opened Pandora's box, and we have misconceptions about what is happiness. When you look at pictures on Facebook, they're always perfect pictures, and we think that's how their lives are. And these young girls are impressionable. They see this perfect model and they don't understand that thing's probably been airbrushed 50 times to make that person look like that. So it really comes down to a lot of conversation, a lot of talk, a lot of building those relationships and encouragement to let them know that we're all perfect in our own eyes, but if we're looking through others' eyes, you'll always see imperfection. So I really focus on loving themselves and accepting themselves, and that they are capable of doing anything that they have this desire and passion to do.
Did any of you have anything to add to that? That's hard to follow.
Well, I'll add real quick. Absolutely, like just what women learn in their homes is so important. Like you really, whenever I have kids, hopefully I'll be a mom one day. But I definitely want to instill that in my kids, that Perfection is not a thing. Like, you just get that out of your mind. You know what I mean? Create your own perfection and use that in your life.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love this question, and we want to hear each of you on this one. What would you, this is from a college student here at FSCJ, what would you say to your 18-year-old self based on what you know now as an accomplished woman? So you get your time machine and you go back. What do you tell yourself? Shawana, do you want to start us off, and then we'll proceed down the way?
No. Of course, y'all want to start you guys off. What would I say to my 18-year-old self? I talked one time about how I was a very voracious reader. And so many times I had questions to other adult figures where, I would want to try to understand something, and where I felt if they didn't have the intellectual stamina or the challenge to answer that question, they bullied you into your own silence. I remember, very, again, turning to poetry, kind of letting that be my way to express myself and to get my feelings out there, where I felt that I couldn't maybe express those things to my parents or to my family members, because people would consistently keep bullying your voice as a young girl. There's this Run DMC song, you talk too much, you never shut up. I remember, very early that being referred to me. And I think adults really bullied me into closing myself off and closing the greatest thing that I think that's about me, which is my voice, which is my ability to communicate and to understand and be an empath to other people. But I shut that part of me off. Because people are oh, they don't want you to be so sensitive, or, you taking things, too much to heart. But that was the way that I was internally designed. And again, I turned a lot of those things off for myself because I was trying to fit into other people's expectations or to get this acceptance of them. Which, I didn't learn a little bit to even way later in my life, later than what I feel to be really comfortable about, of learning how to not only possess that power, but channel it. I was doing it in so many different ways, but not where it came to my younger self, in the ways that, I had relationships with previous boyfriends or didn't speak out for myself. And I always think of that movie, Runaway Bride, when they go back to talk to all of her fiancés, right? And they're asking, how does she like her eggs? And everybody was like, oh, she liked her eggs like mine. She liked scrambled eggs. She liked her eggs hard boiled. She over easy. And I thought I kept turning myself into that person. So if there was anything that I can go back to, tell my 18-year-old self, is to be more in possessiveness of my own self, to believe in who I am and what I can say, and to not be silenced by other people, because again, sometimes you are the smartest person in the room, even at a younger age with your own family, and family can bully you more than others, just to make you feel like you don't have the wherewithal to go forward and to do these things. So just that possession of understanding and knowing your voice and putting it out there to be to be of service if you can. That's what I would want her to know. You got this, girl. You're doing it. You have to unmute yourself, Lourdes.
It had to happen to me eventually. Yeah, not making yourself fit someone else's mold. That's such a great message. Dr. Thomas, do you have advice for your younger self?
Yeah, definitely. So much of what we've been discussing tonight, I wish I had known and internalized when I was 18. But at a much older age, I did get a very good piece of advice from someone, which is that you should never compare your internal state, however you're feeling internally, with someone else's exterior, because you have no idea what's going on inside that person, and they don't need to know what's going on inside you. So you could be insecure, you could be worried, whatever, but you should not make that comparison, because it's just not valid. And then, like Shawana was saying, don't try to fit into other people's molds. That would have been great advice.
I want to add something real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think a lot of women. I agree with Shawana and Dr. Thomas. I think a big thing that I would probably tell myself when I was 18 is the imposter syndrome that we all hear about all the time. I still struggle with it, but when I was really young, like I never wanted to like raise my hand in the classroom. I was one of the shyest students ever. And it's funny because I'm a journalist now. I'm on TV like every day, and you would think that person's not shy, but I wish I could go back and just be like, people are not going to think bad of you just because you ask a question. I just never wanted to be the only person asking a question. And it's crazy because I ask questions now for a living. So go figure. But yeah, so don't put that imposter syndrome away and don't do it.
Yeah, there actually are a lot of data that say women are more likely to suffer from that imposter syndrome than are men. So that's definitely good advice. Dr. Green, do you have some news or information that you wish your 18-year-old self had known?
You know, I probably would not tell my 18-year-old self anything, because I think all the things that I have been through has made me the person I am today. All the mistakes I've made, all the things that have impacted me, whether it has been good or bad, has made me who I am today. So, you know, if I had anything, I would simply say, trust yourself, believe in yourself, and that you can get through anything. Because I'm fearful that if at 18 I knew what I know now, I probably wouldn't be who I am right now.
Do you think you may have scared yourself?
Well, I probably never would have met my husband, because my smarter self says you don't drive from North Carolina at 2 o'clock in the morning back to Florida. But because I was only, 20-some years old and didn't think anything about that, I did. And that's how I met my husband. So that's why I probably would not tell myself too much, because it would probably change who I am today. And I'm very happy with who I am.
Well, I'm glad that you made it through without advice from your current wonderful self to your 18-year-old self. I've got to, admittedly, I think there would be some things I may give as advice to my younger self, but I can see your point as well. Dr. Basin, what about you?
So, I grew up poor working class in Los Angeles, California, raised by a single mother. So pretty much the expectations for my life were carved out before I could see it for myself. Looking back and thinking about my 18-year-old self, the one thing I would tell her is just to keep going, and just, keep going. You can't see what's ahead, but you're going to end up where you're supposed to be. And that's the piece of advice I think I would give my 18-year-old self.
Well, I think that's a really great way to start wrapping up our program. We've heard so many important things from each of you ladies. Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting our event, Lorena. Thank you to our fearless panelists. A lot of fearlessness there. I think a lot of people on our programming today appreciate your candor, your heart. I certainly do. I would also like to thank our TEDxFSCJ production team, folks that are here tonight helping us, as well as those attending our event remotely. Specifically, a big thanks to Amber Korn, Noelle Garvey, Heather Howard, Julia Deriba Montgomery, Ashley Archer, Maya Elena, and Dr. Paul Hendrickson, my colleague and my TEDxFSCJ planning director. And lastly, I'd really like to thank our attendees. We are so delighted that you could join us this evening. We hope that you will join us for our next online event on Thursday, February 11th. That'll be a program focused on criminal justice and youth. And as the date for our next event draws closer, you'll receive an email from TEDxFSCJ inviting you to join us. Good night, and thank you again, and may you each be fearless.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.